Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to perform a turning kick. A turning kick is ideal for attacking an opponent to your side front, like this. The main tool for this kick is the ball of the foot, so you need to turn the toes well back to expose this tool. But you can also use the instep, and if you're wearing shoes you can also use the toes as the attacking tool. And if you're at very close range you can use the knee as the attacking tool. The turning kick can be done as a high, middle or low kick. If it's done as a high kick, the attacking tool will reach the attacker's eye level at the moment of impact. If it's done as a middle kick, it will reach the attacker's shoulder level. And if it's done as a low kick, it will reach the attacker's umbilicus level. Now the kick can be done off the rear leg, like this, or off the front leg, like that. Obviously the rear leg is more powerful because you can pivot a lot more and you can bring your weight into it a lot more, so you've got more mass behind the kick. When you're using your front leg, your pivoting is restricted. Also the ability to throw your mass into the kick is also restricted. But the front leg does have a lot of practical uses, especially when you're close to the opponent and you want to throw out a very quick kick. Okay? Now notice the kick moves in an arc like that, and it's good to think of it in two parts. One is to rotate, to pivot and turn your hip, there you chamber the leg, and then is to extend the leg at the end. Okay, so it's worth practicing in two stages as a beginner, 1 and 2, and then once you've got used to it, you do it as one continuous movement. Okay. While you're kicking, keep the arms in front of your chest in a very natural position, like that. Okay, don't tension up though. When you make contact, your knee should be bent, so you don't straighten the leg. Okay? So you bend the knee and then you extend it, but your knee is still bent on impact, like that. Okay? So another thing is that when you make contact, avoid having your toes pointing up. If you don't turn enough, or you don't pivot enough, or lean back enough, or fail to turn your waist, you're going to end up kicking upwards and you're going to lose a lot of power. In fact, you should reach an apex, and as you turn a bit more, you start to come down. That's the time to do the turning kick, like that. So it's coming slightly down. But at the moment of impact, actually, your foot will be vertically this way, horizontally this way. Okay, so you don't want to kick at an angle. The kick should be perpendicular, the direction of the kick perpendicular to the target. Now I'm going to show you 3 ways to practice this kick. One is to be in front of the opponent and to sidestep into a side front position and perform the kick. Secondly is to do it from a side front position off the rear leg. And thirdly, to do it off the front leg from a side front position. Now there are many other ways you can use turning kick, but it's useful to know these 3 to start off with. So for the first example, assume you're facing the opponent, both of you full facing. It's very difficult to hit the front of the body from this position. You try to do a turning kick and you'll just skim the front of the body. Okay, you can aim for the side, but that's a smaller area. Ideally, if you want to hit the front, you need to get to a side front position, and then all that area is exposed to be attacked. Okay, so when you're here, the target is roughly 45 degrees, doesn't have to be exact. Your stationary foot will be pointing 45 degrees outwards, like this. Okay. So to get into that position, there are many variations. I mean, you can step across and then pivot, or you can just place the foot 45 degrees outwards, but then you don't have as much rotation and you would need to jerk the hip to get that rotation. Okay? Now, either way is okay. The pivoting has a longer delay, whereas the jerking of the hip will be a lot quicker. But then if you don't have so much rotational force, you have to rely on throwing your mass into the kick. That's okay if you're further back. So if you're further back and you're moving in and kicking, then it'll have reasonable force. But if you're quite close and you're stepping out, you're not moving into the opponent so much, then you probably want to rely on that rotational force a bit more. So there's a lot of variations, and depending on the situation, how you get power can vary slightly. But use all the elements, a bit of rotation, a bit of pivoting, rotation from the hip, very fast jerk, and throwing your weight into the kick by moving into it a little bit. Okay? So you've got to gauge these variables to suit the situation. Now notice when you finish the kick, your shoulders are parallel to the opponents if they're full facing. Okay, so I've got my stationary foot 45 degrees, I'm kicking roughly at a 45-degree angle, and my body's full facing. So that's the situation for turning kick. Okay, so here's an example of doing the side step turning kick. So for the second example, assume that you're already in a side front position to the opponent. So you don't need to do any stepping across, although you may need to tweak your position. If it's not quite right, you might need a small step just to tweak it and get to the optimum position. And this could be helpful if the step is in that direction. It just helps initiate the momentum going into the target. Now it's very important where you face, because although the opponent's in my side front, if I turn to face it, the actual target's in front of me, not to my side front. Okay? And General Choi said not to attack with a turning kick, not to attack an opponent or a target that's in front of you. Now there are some exceptions. I mean, if you use instep, it is possible, and if you do a side turning kick, which I'll explain later, it is still possible to attack in front of you. But ideally with a turning kick, you want to kick it side front. So really you should be facing a point that's actually behind the opponent here, behind the target here. So if you're breaking boards, you still face that point there. So your stance is facing behind. Okay. So technically, if I'm facing that way, the target is on my side front there. So that way you're able to get some forward motion and some rotational force. Okay. If I'm facing the opponent, the forward motion is not going to help, because I'm moving into the target and I'll be very difficult to hit the target because I'm going across that line and I'm likely to miss. I want to be kicking into that target that way, not that way. Okay, so you face behind, you move across in that direction, and you rotate and kick in like that. Okay. So everything else is the same. Your stationary foot will be pointing 45 degrees outwards. Your shoulders will be parallel to the opponents at the end. Your knee is bent. The way you kick at the end will be the same as when you did it with a side step. But here you can get a lot more rotational movement, because before, when you did the step across, your foot at most was facing forward, maybe slightly out. Here you can face it in a little bit more, get a little bit more rotation. But don't forget that forward motion is also going to add to the power, so utilize both. Okay, so here's an example of how this kick is done. So for the third example, you're kicking off the front leg. Again, you're positioned with a target to your side front, but the way you face is going to be different to the previous example. In the previous example, you were facing to the direction behind the target. This time you need to be facing the direction in front of the target. So technically, your opponent is also at your side front, but on the other side. And the reason for this is that you need to get your hip forward into the target. So if I'm facing directly in front, there's hardly any room to move that hip in, and the power will just come from the knee. But you want to get your hip into it as well. And if you're facing behind the target, your hip's already gone too far in. Okay? So the only way is to face a little bit to the front, like that. The pivoting will be very short. Okay? There's not much room to pivot, and there's not much room to move the hip either, but if you do a very short, sharp movement, a jerking motion with the hip, then that should add a bit more to the power. So it's quite a difficult way to kick. So it takes a lot of technique to be very quick with the hip jerk and to throw your weight in such a short distance. But with practice, you're able to do this. Okay? So here's an example of how the kick's done. There is a variation of the turning kick called the side turning kick, and you use this when you're more abreast of the opponent or maybe further away. Okay? So with this kick, your stationary foot is pointing 75 degrees rather than 45, and you're kicking more to the side. So the knee is a little bit straighter than before, and especially your hip, it's not turned in. Remember, turning kick, you were further back, you had 45, roughly 45 there, but with the side turning kick, you're more in line. And that's why it's useful for attacking an opponent in front of you, because it relies more on rotational motion. Okay? So from here, you can come around and rotate. The forward motion is not going to be so useful because it just throws you off balance. So the side turning kick uses more rotational motion. So if you have an opponent in front of you, you can use the side turning kick instead, and that's why it's used a lot in competition, and especially if you use the instep, because you can hit the target from a greater distance. So here's an example of side turning kick. There's a lot more to be said about turning kicks. I only described certain things very briefly today. I need to explain a lot more about positioning, how to use turning kicks. It's a very complicated kick, so you need to understand situations where you can use it and times where it shouldn't be used, and how to adapt your positioning to utilize the kick efficiently and effectively. So I'll cover that in future videos. But that's it for today. Please join me for my next lesson. I'll be talking about back piercing kick. So I'll see you next time. And please subscribe if you haven't done so already. See you then. Goodbye.